Hey, congratulations. Such a creepy, scary movie, the Wind here. So, for both of you, what attracted you to this project?
Well, you got it first, so you go first.
Yeah, I got the script that Teresa Sutherland wrote, and I mean, I was attracted to the Western genre straight out the gate, even before reading it. And then once I started reading it, I have to say the main attraction for me was that the lead character, who Caitlin plays, Lizzie, was so fully dimensional and so complicated and such a heroine, but a flawed heroine. And I just felt like she was really relatable, and it was a story that was exciting to tell because the characters were so strong.
Yeah, and when I got to read the script, I think what excited me most, especially because I grew up on Westerns and I love horror, I've played in several horror movies, and seeing the combination of the two was something that we haven't seen very often. So that was sort of my first curiosity. That I was like, oh, all right, we've got something different here. And then having this heroine who stays on the homestead was a totally refreshing way to look at a Western, as opposed to following the men who go on these excursions or, chase off Indians and, go after treasures. Very often in those Westerns, you sort of see them leaving and the wife is waving goodbye, and that's her story. And so now it's that interesting thing where we're actually going to stay with her and see what she experiences, which is a whole other world of horror and atrocity, especially on the frontier at that time.
Were there any special preparations for both of you in trying to do this type of pioneer movie? Was there training of doing chores or basically doing a little bit of research on this background?
Yeah, I mean, when we, the day I got it, Emma and Teresa gave me this book called Women of the Prairie by Joanna Stratton. And that was firsthand accounts and anecdotes of women and their experiences on the prairie. And that was deeply informative. There was one description that I will never forget of this woman who had been isolated on her homestead for about 6 months because her husband had left. And then finally, when she got back to a town, which was about a year and a half of being off the homestead, she saw a tree. And this tree drove her into what these accounts called hysterics, madness, or the manifestation of the devil. And to me, I just thought, wow, if being so isolated on the prairie can cause you to have such a feeling when you see a tree.
Because she hadn't seen a tree.
Because she hadn't seen a tree, because in the prairie there are no trees. It's just shrubs and rocks. And so, yeah, I guess I should say that. But so to me, I just thought, wow, if seeing a tree or witnessing a tree again must have meant that you thought you were never going to see one again. And what state of isolation were you in to experience such a deeply profound moment when you see something like that again? And so that allowed me to really go into these deep places where you're going to drive yourself to that state where a tree could make you have this reaction. And so that was a really cool piece of information. And then as far as our chores on the homestead go,
Caitlin's a pro. She jumped in and just started doing chores as often as we could in between scenes, and we had a tight schedule, so I think we were trying to squeeze as much out of every day and
every moment.
This is a gritty, hardy person. She could do it. She weeded a whole field in between one of our takes, and like a whole garden, and I just looked over and was, wow, she got some muscle, man. But I think that we were trying to be really period accurate, but to Caitlin's point, I think all of us diving into the research of the period were actually most taken with not just the details of the chores and the everyday things that our production designers sourced from and we all sourced from, but also the emotional state of these women, and that was, I think, the primary thing that we all walked away from that research was really trying to channel that.
Now, this is technically a horror genre type of movie. Emma, I'm not sure. Were you familiar with horror before, or why did you want to do something like this?
Yeah, I was familiar with it as a moviegoer, as a film fan, but not as a filmmaker. So this was a real learning curve for me, and it was really fun. This was not Caitlin's first rodeo, so that was really helpful in terms of bringing out the scares within performance, which is so vital. And I think this whole film, we're really seeing the story through Lizzie's perspective. And if she's not freaked out, we won't be. And I think it's really her own mental deterioration and paranoia that brings us into our own fear and paranoia. So that was huge. And then I think also finding the terror and the creeps within things that we don't always associate with being scary, like a bucket blowing in the wind and the creaks in the wood, and all the things that we were sourcing from just the environment. Obviously, the wind and sound design was a huge part of that.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think the sound design was really important because just as far as getting into this character's mindset, when you're the only human, the only being, any other noise has you on alert. Because if you're not making the noise, something else is. Mm-hmm. And most likely, given the circumstances, that's probably a threat. So just the acuteness of the sound and how the sound itself becomes such a character, because she really is that character is just having a conversation with her surroundings. She's alone most of the time. And so it's the engagement with this weather and with this landscape that I think is so intriguing.
Mm-hmm. How did you get into that mindset of your character? That was amazing.
Thanks. I think part of it is doing the information and doing the research, because details of that period help and sort of get me out of myself and allow me to sort of fixate on things that were important or of value to people of that time that are not to me. And then I do a lot of body work when it comes to acting. So it's sort of like finding character tensions. I mean, we all have our own tensions. And so it's sort of like letting go of my own tensions and then finding new tensions that belong to her. And having a director who was such a truly like calming and stoic force on set. And I remember, I think one of the only things I always said to Emma was just, if I go too far, just pull me back. But I think often as an actor, you're fearful of going too far or too big or, too something. But because I knew I was safeguarded and supported, having the permission to go too far allowed me to sort of get out of my own way where I didn't have to check myself, because I knew I had someone that I could trust that could check me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it allows you to sort of lose the self-consciousness and just go, because you know that if you steer too far to the right, she's gonna just guide me back. And that really was the experience. It was like a sort of a dance between us where I could bounce off the walls. And I knew there was someone who was going to catch me.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Now, it's besides the characters in the movie and the sound, which is another character in the movie, but I have to bring up the setting itself, which is also a very important character of the movie. Talk about the two cabins and the isolation.
Yeah, I mean, we shot in New Mexico, and we were location scouting there, and both of those cabins really fit for what we were looking for. So we landed on the locations with the cabins already in place, which was such a great canvas for our production design team to then just really dig into the details of the period. And they dressed both cabins 360, which I think was a really immersive experience for the cast.
Yeah, that was incredible.
And, there were times where Caitlin would grab a prop during a take that, we hadn't blocked, and it added so much. And we didn't have a ton of rehearsal time. We didn't have any rehearsal time, so we were rolling on our rehearsals, and to have that as an additional element to interact with was huge. But then, I mean, the real reason why we were out there, cabins aside, was the endless skyline, the endless, horizon. And I think that this film is one in which the wide open space eventually starts to become what's encroaching in on Lizzie's experience out there, and it becomes claustrophobic. So I think we were, really wanting to choose a place that let the story, channel through Lizzie in that way. And
Yeah,
great.
and I mean, I think the art department was so incredible. I mean, this was a low-budget movie, and between the directing and the cinematographer and the art department, the world that they created truly was immersive, and also the distinction between the two cabins. They spent so much detail in making everything that was in the Macklin Lizzie's cabin functional. There was nothing there that was not functional as far as their survival. And then when you went into the cabin of Emma, nothing was functional. So everything was frilly and useless because these were people who were from a different space, from this sort of metropolitan city world, who had no clue how to survive. And the things that were important to them as city dwellers was completely useless here. I mean, I know the details of Emma where it's just like she had candy and she had laces and she had perfume and all of these things that mean absolutely nothing out here. And so I think those, just whether we're aware of them or not, just those textures in the two different spaces really give us an impression of who these people are and just enhances the depth of their worlds.
Yeah. And I think also the fact that we were driving to set every day outside of town and feeling very removed from civilization and modern day technologies. A lot of our phones didn't work.
None of our phones worked.
It was, and then we were hearing the wind constantly. Like I think those elements of the environment that we were shooting in, since they were such big parts of the story, just really helped get everyone in that headspace.
Yeah, we had wind machines, but we never used them because it was so windy.
Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, did anything creep you out there? Or did you feel isolated?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, truly. I mean,
Definitely isolated.
especially the night shoots, you would hear the coyotes off in the distance. You would walk
Totally.
out into the, if we did a few shots where we're out in sort of the empty space and you can't, it's almost like being in the middle of the ocean where you don't know which direction is which way. And so that loss of direction too is so frustrating. And
Yeah, disorienting.
Yeah.
I remember every time we were doing scenes where there was a bunch of blood, and granted it was fake blood, inevitably crows would start cawing. And
Yeah.
that was so eerie and crazy and amazing, and it felt like the environment was with us in some way. And then some magical things happened too, like, we'd be shooting inside the cabin and all of a sudden, like, come outside and there was just a herd of wild horses
Yeah.
that had,
wandered through.
wandered through, and it was
There was even one horse, because the well was not a real well. I hate to break all these wonderful illusions, but there was a horse that went up to the bucket and was tapping the bucket because
Trying to get water.
it thought there was water.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
and I remember the art department ended up filling a bucket of water for them.
But they were like, that's the biggest compliment, that the horse thought.
Yeah,
it was
that the
an
horse thought.
actual
I mean,
well.
I feel like the art department was truly so just in awe because they're like, oh my god, this horse thought it was real,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
One of the things I was fascinated about this production, it's I want to say it's a mostly female crew with females in the lead, female director,
It
female
was.
producer.
Yeah, female editor.
Yeah.
The art department was run by women. Our first AD was also a woman. I would say it was fairly balanced. You know what I mean?
Yeah, our costume designer, our makeup
makeup
artist.
artist.
Yeah, it was really female heavy crew.
But I don't think I think that just happened organically too, right?
It did, it was also just happening so quickly in terms of pre-production and bringing the team together. And I think that the producers really felt like this would be, cool if it was a female-heavy crew. So I think that was good foresight. I was mostly just, meeting with folks who were available and interested. And I think that...
And super talented.
And super talented. And I think that a lot of females were attracted to this project. So I think the interest was maybe heightened a little bit by female creatives, but it was great.
It was really, really cool.
Yeah.
So for a small budget film like this, what was the greatest challenge for either of you?
I would say time for me. I felt like, we were really, the pre-production was short, and we did as much as we could, obviously, and that's such the fundamental building blocks of any film. But every day, I think we just wanted to make sure to carve out as much time as possible to discover the performances and to actually, play with the scenes and getting a variety of different types of, performances. And I think that when you're going at such a clip pace, that can be hard sometimes. But I think that we did a pretty good job given the givens.
I mean, I think every production, whether it's 700,000 or 120 million, always faces obstacles, and it's such a feat to finish any movie. So I feel like every set is gonna have its thing. But I actually truly, this was one of the best sets I've ever been on. And I don't think that the lack of funding or anything got in the way. Everybody was so deeply committed and invested that, to me, it felt like the highest budget job I'd ever been on, because the quality of work was what mattered, and that's what everyone brought. So, yeah, I mean, I've never even thought about any obstacles or hurdles, because set life is hard, so it's not, it's like, it's a rough, lackluster vibe, so I think that, this is one of the smoothest productions I've ever been on, even with financial limitations. And to me, when you look at it, it doesn't feel like that. The way that everyone brought their best work to it really does make it feel elevated.
Excellent. And I don't want to forget to mention the scariest thing that I find in the movie was the music itself.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the composer?
Yeah, Ben Lovett. He did an amazing job. He had scored a film called The Ritual that I had seen and started using some of that temp score in our cut. And he had worked with one of our producers before. And he just brought a whole other dimension to it. We always knew, and I mean, Caitlin, you were so tuned into this as well, like how important the score was going to be. I feel like you asked about that on a really regular basis during post.
I was always like, who's the composer? Who's the composer?
And there's so little dialogue, and the sound design is so important. It is truly front and center for a majority of the film, and I think that the way the score was going to interact with that and heighten the performance was always something that we were thinking about, and Ben Lovett just nailed it. He brought all these instruments out of the woodwork that I had never heard of, old, awesome, creaky, cracky, imperfect instruments that just added this texture and level of discomfort, I think, and beauty at the same time, which is really like the line that the film's walking the whole time is a horrifying, uncomfortable beauty.
Yeah, and I truly think with the sound mixing sort of interacting with the composition of the music was so beautiful. I mean, it's sort of, there was, the wind would pick up and then the score would take over, and I think that melding was done so seamlessly, and that was one of the joys, because that's not part of my job, was seeing that was really, really exciting. Because it's true, she's not speaking much, and the way that the music speaks for her was really something else.
Well, it certainly made my skin crawl then. So let's wrap it up with
Yes.
talk about some of your future projects.
Well, I guess I'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think we're both in the middle of developing some things.
Yeah.
And then also just looking for roles and films to jump into right away. So a combo of, I think I can speak for both of us to say that we're both dipping our toes in horror.
Yes.
And continuing to want to do that, but beyond that as well. So
Yeah, there is something scary in the works.
Excellent. Hey,
Dun.
thank you very much for speaking with me. This
Yeah,
is
of
quite
course.
enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.